The taste of cheap hospital bleach was still coating my tongue when I opened my eyes. I was supposed to be dead, rotting in a county grave, while my stepmother danced on my grave and liquidated my mother's company. Instead, I was staring at the crystal chandelier of my family's dining room. Exactly 3 years in the past. Tonight was the night she ruined my life. I looked across the mahogany table. She opened her mouth to speak. I didn't let her. Dying is not a cinematic experience. There is no flashing montage of your best memories, no warm light at the end of a dark tunnel. For me, dying was a slow, humiliating process in a freezing hospice room that smelled of ammonia and old decay. My organs had been failing for weeks, the result of a mysterious, heavy metal toxicity that no doctor could quite trace back to the daily vitamins my stepmother, Amelia, had lovingly insisted I take. I remember the final moments clearly. The hum of the heart monitor had become a sluggish, erratic beep. Amelia had stood over my bed, her face cast in the harsh, fluorescent light. She wasn't wearing her usual public mask of maternal concern. Her features were relaxed, her lips curved in a thin, satisfied line. She leaned in close, her breath smelling of peppermint and expensive gin. "You never really stood a chance, Harper," she had whispered, her manicured fingers gently stroking my hair in a mocking gesture of affection. "Your father already signed the proxy. The company is mine. Madison gets the house. And you get to be a tragic footnote, a cautionary tale of addiction and mental collapse. Sleep well, little bird." The monitor flatlined. The cold rushed in. The darkness was absolute. And then, a violent jolt, a sharp intake of breath burned my lungs. My eyes snapped open, tearing at the sudden influx of light. The smell of ammonia was gone, replaced instantly by the rich, savory aroma of roasted duck and the sharp, crisp scent of a very expensive Chablis. I blinked, my vision swimming for a fraction of a second, before focusing on a bowl of white orchids sitting in the center of a long, polished mahogany table. I felt a heavy silver fork in my right hand. I felt the smooth, cold silk of my dress against my legs. I pressed my thumb against the edge of the fork, hard enough that the metal bit into my skin. Pain. Sharp, immediate, undeniable pain. I wasn't a ghost. I wasn't dead. I slowly lifted my gaze. Sitting across from me was my father, Richard. He looked younger, the deep stress lines around his eyes completely absent, his hair more pepper than salt. He was laughing at something, swirling the wine in his glass. Next to him sat Amelia. She wore a pearl-white cashmere sweater, looking every inch the devoted, sophisticated matriarch. To her left was Madison, my stepsister, scrolling through her phone beneath the edge of the table, looking bored. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 times. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck as the realization slammed into my chest. The dress I was wearing, the meal on the table, the date on my father's Rolex, October 14th, the eve of my 25th birthday. I knew this night. God, I knew this night down to the microscopic details. This was the night the nightmare had officially begun. Tomorrow, according to my late grandfather's will, I was legally slated to inherit his 51% controlling stake in Hayes Logistics. My father, who had always been a brilliant engineer but a terrible businessman, had been passed over. Amelia couldn't stomach the idea of me holding the purse strings to the empire she so desperately wanted to drain. In my previous life, this dinner was an ambush. At exactly 8:15, Amelia had cleared her throat, put on a face of devastating sorrow, and staged an intervention. She had pulled a manila envelope from her Prada bag. Inside were forged clinic records, fake toxicology reports, and a handful of prescription pills she claimed to have found hidden in my bathroom. My father, who hated confrontation and trusted his wife implicitly, was horrified. I had been completely blindsided. When I tried to defend myself, the words had slurred together. Amelia had the kitchen staff spike my water with a heavy sedative just before the meal. By the time I woke up the next morning, I was in a private, locked-down psychiatric facility upstate. My phone confiscated. My credibility destroyed. My father filed for emergency conservatorship before noon. I didn't see the outside world for 6 months. I looked down at the crystal water goblet sitting near my right hand. The ice had barely melted. A faint, almost imperceptible cloudiness lingered near the bottom. I didn't touch it. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, heavy rhythm that threatened to break through my chest. The sheer impossibility of my situation warred with the overwhelming, visceral reality of the room. I was alive. I was 24 again. My body was whole, free of the poison that would eventually kill me. I looked at Amelia. She was smiling at my father, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. It was the kind of smile that cost tens of thousands of dollars in dental work and required a total absence of a soul. A dark, heavy calm suddenly washed over me. It started in my chest and spread to my fingertips, steadying my trembling hands. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. In my first life, I was a naive, grieving daughter who just wanted her family to stay together. I had given Amelia the benefit of the doubt. I had tried to play fair. I had ended up dead on a plastic mattress. Not this time. "Richard, darling," Amelia murmured, her voice like velvet. "Before dessert comes out, I think we need to have a rather serious family discussion. Here it comes, the opening act." I watched her hand leave my father's arm and drift downward, resting casually on the strap of the black leather Prada bag, sitting on the empty chair beside her. Her fingers grazed the clasp. "Oh?" My father looked up, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, oblivious to the guillotine poised over my neck. "What is it, Bee? You look worried." Madison finally looked up from her phone, a knowing smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She knew. Of course, she knew. She had probably helped plant the empty pill bottles in my room. Amelia took a deep, shuddering breath, a master class in theatrical hesitation. "It's about Harper. Richard, I didn't want to bring this up, especially tonight, but I've been so terribly frightened for her." She tapped her manicured index finger against her wine glass twice, the physical tell, the exact motion she made right before she delivered the kill shot. She leaned down, her fingers snapping the brass clasp of her bag open. I didn't wait for her to reach inside. "You're going to want to leave that bag closed, Amelia," I said. My voice didn't shake. It cut through the dining room like a gunshot, startling in its absolute lack of emotion. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just spoke with the flat, deadened certainty of someone reading a coroner's report. Amelia froze, her hand hovering inches above the open purse. Her eyes darted to me, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing her perfectly powdered face. She wasn't used to me speaking out of turn. The old Harper would have shrunk back, waiting politely for the adults to finish. "Excuse me," Amelia said, recovering quickly, though her smile strained at the edges. "Harper, sweetheart, please let me finish. This is hard enough as it is." "No, it really isn't," I replied, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the mahogany table. I laced my fingers together, staring directly into her eyes. "Because I know exactly what you're about to do. And frankly, I don't have the patience to sit through the community theater performance." My father frowned, his brow furrowing. "Harper, what is wrong with you? Don't speak to your stepmother that way. She's trying to tell us something." "I'll save her the breath, Dad," I said, not breaking eye contact with Amelia. I watched the slight, rapid pulse beating at the base of her throat. "She's going to tell you she was cleaning my bathroom this afternoon. She's going to say she looked in the back of the linen closet and found a hidden stash of OxyContin. Then, she's going to reach into that expensive black bag of hers and pull out a manila envelope." Amelia's face went the color of skim milk. The forced smile vanished entirely, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of shock. Her hand, still hovering over the purse, began to tremble. "Harper, I don't know what—" "In that envelope," I continued, my voice gaining a steady, rhythmic momentum, "are 3 forged documents. The first is a toxicology report from the Sterling Clinic, dated last Tuesday, claiming I tested positive for a cocktail of narcotics. The second is a psychiatric evaluation, signed by Dr. Elias Aris, stating that my grief over Grandpa's death has triggered a severe manic episode, and that I am a danger to myself. The third is a pre-drafted emergency medical proxy, waiting for your signature, Dad. A proxy that hands Amelia temporary control of my medical and financial decisions, just in time for my 25th birthday tomorrow." Dead silence fell over the room. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning vent and the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock. My father stared at me, then looked at Amelia, then back at me. He let out a nervous, baffled laugh. "Harper, what kind of sick joke is this? Are you imagining things?" "Ask her," I said smoothly. I gestured toward the Prada bag. "Ask her to open the bag, Dad. If I'm crazy, if I'm just making up a sick joke, then the bag is empty. Go ahead, Amelia. Show him." Amelia didn't move. She sat entirely paralyzed, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes were wide, staring at me, not as a stepdaughter, but as if a stranger had just crawled out of my skin. How could I know? She had orchestrated this flawlessly. She had paid cash to the doctor. She had printed the documents on her private computer. It was impossible for me to possess this information. "Mom," Madison whispered, the smirk completely wiped from her face. "Mom, say something." Amelia finally swallowed, her throat clicking audibly. She tried to reconstruct her mask, forcing a look of profound, tearful devastation. "Richard, she's having an episode right now. Look at her. She's paranoid. The paranoia is part of the addiction. I didn't want to do this here, but..." She made a sudden, desperate grab into the bag. I was faster. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs screeching violently against the hardwood floor. I crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides. Before Amelia could pull the envelope out, I grabbed the bottom of the Prada bag and yanked it upward, upending it entirely over the center of the dinner table. Lipstick, a compact mirror, a wallet, and a set of keys clattered against the mahogany. And there, landing perfectly next to the bowl of white orchids, was a thick manila envelope. An orange prescription pill bottle rolled out next to it, stopping right by my father's water glass. My father stared at the bottle. He reached out with a trembling hand and picked it up. He read the label, his face drained of color. "OxyContin," he read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at the envelope, then slowly turned his gaze to his wife. "Go ahead, Dad," I commanded gently, though there was no warmth in my tone. "Open the envelope. Check the signatures. Check the dates. Tell me if I was wrong about a single piece of paper in there." Amelia lunged for the envelope. "Richard, don't. You don't understand. Sit down, Amelia," my father barked. It was the first time in my life I had ever heard him raise his voice to her. The sudden explosion of anger made both Amelia and Madison flinch backward. His hands were shaking as he tore the seal of the envelope. He pulled out the crisp, white medical papers. I stood silently, watching his eyes dart across the page. I watched the confusion morph into horror, and then, as he processed the reality of the dates and the pre-drafted legal proxy, the horror hardened into a deep, sickening realization. "This," my father stammered, looking up at Amelia, "this medical proxy, it's already filled out. It lists you as the primary conservator. Why do you have this? Why wouldn't you come to me before drafting legal documents about my daughter?" Amelia was hyperventilating, her perfectly styled hair falling slightly over her face. "Richard, please, you have to listen to me. I was doing it to protect us, to protect the company. She's sick, Richard. She needs help." "She's not sick, Amelia," I said, my voice dropping an octave, settling into a dark, unforgiving register. "But you are extremely careless." "Shut up!" Madison finally shrieked, leaping up from her chair. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face flushed red with panicked anger. "You don't get to talk to her like that. You're a freak, Harper. You've always been a freak, and my mother has done nothing but try to fix you." I turned my head and looked at Madison. In my past life, her constant bullying and manipulation had worn me down to a shadow. I had cried over her insults. I had begged for her sisterly affection. Looking at her now, all I saw was a pathetic, shallow girl who was just as complicit in my murder as her mother. "Fix me?" I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound that made Madison take a step back. "You mean like how she fixed the accounting books for the Hayes Foundation, Madison? Or do we want to talk about that too?" Amelia let out a strangled gasp. "Harper, stop." "No, let's keep going," I said, walking back to my side of the table. I didn't sit down. I stood tall, commanding the room, letting the adrenaline of a second chance at life burn through my veins. Because if we're putting all our cards on the table tonight, we shouldn't stop at fake drug addictions. I looked at my father. He looked broken, holding the forged papers like they were coated in acid. "Dad," I said, softening my voice just a fraction to cut through his shock. "I know you trust her. I know you let her handle the charitable foundation's finances because you hate the paperwork. But she hasn't been managing it. She's been bleeding it dry." "That is a lie!" Amelia screamed, her composure entirely shattered. She slammed her hands on the table, knocking over her wine glass. The Chablis spilled across the wood, dripping onto the Persian rug like pale blood. "Richard, she is out of her mind. She's making things up to deflect from her own drug problem." "Am I?" I asked softly. I tapped my temple, as if trying to recall a distant memory, though the numbers were burned into my brain from the forensic audit the FBI had conducted after my death in my previous life. An audit my spirit had to watch Amelia bribe her way out of. "Let's check my memory," I said loudly, ensuring my voice carried over Amelia's frantic protests. "Cayman National Bank. Account holder listed under a shell corporation called Horizon Ventures. Account number ending in 4402. Routing number 068. I rattled off the 9 digits, flawlessly. Amelia stopped breathing. Her hands, still pressed against the wet wood of the table, turned white at the knuckles. "Over the last 2 years," I continued, staring her down, "exactly $2.4 million has been siphoned from the Hayes Foundation's Disaster Relief Fund into that offshore account. Money that was supposed to build shelters. An account that Amelia set up 3 months after marrying you, Dad. If you don't believe me, call Thomas at the legal department right now. Tell him to run a shadow audit on the Foundation's Q3 transfers." My father didn't move to grab his phone. He didn't have to. The truth was written in the absolute. Terrified devastation on his wife's face. Amelia looked like she had just been hit by a freight train. She was trembling so violently, her teeth were chattering. "B," my father whispered. His voice cracked. "Tell me she's lying. Tell me right now." Amelia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The elegant, commanding stepmother who had dictated my life, who had orchestrated my death, was suddenly nothing more than a cornered thief. She looked at Madison, then at the door, then down at the spilled wine. It wasn't like that," Amelia finally choked out, tears spilling over her mascara, leaving dark, ugly tracks down her cheeks. "Richard, the market was turning. I was trying to build a safety net for us. You're too generous. You give everything away. You stole from my father," I interrupted, my voice cracking like a whip. "You plotted to drug me, have me committed, and steal my grandfather's company. You are a parasite, Amelia, and your time feeding on this family is over." I turned to my father. He was staring at Amelia like he was looking at a monster. In a way, he was. The illusion was broken. The spell she had kept him under for 5 years had been shattered in less than 5 minutes. "Dad," I said gently, "do not drink anything she gives you. Do not sign anything she puts in front of you. And call security to have her and Madison escorted off the property. Tonight." "You can't do that," Madison cried out, her voice shrill and desperate. "This is our house. You can't throw us out." "It's my grandfather's house," I corrected her coldly. "And, as of midnight tonight, it's legally mine, along with 51% of everything else." I didn't wait for their response. I didn't need to see Amelia drop to her knees and beg, though I heard the heavy thud as she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing my father's name. I didn't need to hear my father's hollow, devastated demands for the truth. I turned my back on them and walked out of the dining room. My heels clicked sharply against the marble floor of the foyer. I walked straight past the kitchen, where I knew the staff had the spiked water pitcher, and headed toward my grandfather's old study. I closed the heavy oak door behind me and locked it. The room smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. I walked over to the mahogany desk, gripped the edges, and looked at my reflection in the dark window pane. My chest was heaving. My hands were finally shaking, the delayed adrenaline crashing through my system like a tidal wave. I laughed, a raw, wet sound that was half sob, half triumph. I had done it. I had survived the night. I had cut the head off the snake before it could even bare its fangs. But as I stared at my reflection in the glass, the ghost of the hospital room, cold, brushed against the back of my neck. Amelia's plot to take the company was just the first layer of the rot. There were board members who had aided her. There was the doctor who had sold his license to write my fake diagnosis. There was Oliver, my fiancé, who had conveniently been out of the country when I died, but who I now realized had signed off on the liquidation of my assets. They all thought I was a naive little girl they could use and throw away. I picked up the heavy brass phone on the desk and dialed my grandfather's personal attorney. "Thomas," I said when he answered, my voice steady, cold, and utterly transformed. "It's Harper. I need you at the house immediately. Bring the succession paperwork. We're going to war." Thomas arrived exactly 22 minutes after I called him. He didn't ring the bell. He let himself in through the side entrance, a habit formed over 40 years of acting as my grandfather's closest confidant and legal bulldog. Thomas was a man carved from old granite, all sharp angles, tailored tweed, and ruthless efficiency. When he walked into the study, he took one look at my posture and locked the door behind him. "I saw the luggage in the foyer," he said, dropping a thick leather briefcase onto the desk. He didn't ask if I was okay. Thomas didn't deal in emotions. He dealt in liabilities. "Your father is sitting in the dark in the living room. He looks like a man who just watched his house burn down." "His house did burn down," I replied, my voice steady. I lit the match. Thomas unlatched his briefcase. The brass locks snapped open with a sharp, satisfying click. "You sounded entirely different on the phone, Harper. Your grandfather used to get that tone when he was about to gut a competitor. What exactly happened at dinner?" I didn't give him a summary. I gave him the evidence. I handed him the manila envelope Amelia had brought to the table. Thomas put on his reading glasses, his pale blue eyes scanning the forged toxicology report, the fake psychiatric evaluation, and the medical proxy. As he read, the tight line of his mouth grew impossibly tighter. The muscles in his jaw ticked. "Eris," Thomas muttered, reading the doctor's signature. "Elias Eris. He's on the payroll at Hayes Logistics, corporate wellness consultant. He's a mercenary in a white coat," I said. I crossed my arms, feeling the chill of the air conditioning against my bare shoulders. "Amelia bought him. But that's just the surface level, Thomas. Look at my computer." I spun my grandfather's heavy leather chair around and tapped the keyboard, waking up the monitor. I brought up the offshore routing numbers and the shadow ledgers I had memorized from the FBI audit in my past life. I had spent the last 20 minutes cross-referencing them with the Foundation's public tax filings. The discrepancies were glaring if you knew exactly where to look. Thomas leaned over my shoulder. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the heavy rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock and the soft hum of the hard drive. "She routed it through a Cayman shell," Thomas said softly, tracing a finger against the glass of the screen. "Horizon Ventures. My God, $2.5 million. She's been bleeding the disaster relief fund for 2 years. Dad gave her total autonomy over the foundation," I said. "He hates spreadsheets. He trusted her." Thomas stood up straight, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. He expected a grieving, fragile girl. He was looking at a ghost who had clawed her way back from a county grave. "Why didn't you bring this to me sooner?" he asked. "I only put the pieces together tonight," I lied smoothly. It was easier than explaining that I had died, that I had watched my own autopsy from the ceiling of a freezing morgue. "But we don't have time to look backward. It's almost midnight." Thomas checked his watch. 11:45. "The succession papers," I said, pointing to his briefcase. "Are they ready?" "They've been ready for a year," Thomas said. He pulled a thick stack of legal documents, bound in blue cardstock, from the leather bag. He smoothed them out on the mahogany desk. "Your grandfather's trust stipulates that upon the exact stroke of midnight on your 25th birthday, his 51% controlling stake in Hayes Logistics transfers directly to you. No contingencies, no board approval required. It is an ironclad transfer of total corporate authority." He uncapped a heavy Mont Blanc pen and set it down next to the signature line. "If you sign this, Harper, there is no going back," Thomas warned, his voice low. "You aren't just taking money. You are taking the helm of an international shipping empire. There are sharks on the board who will try to eat you alive. Your stepmother will lawyer up. It will be brutal. Let them try." I picked up the pen. The metal felt cold and heavy in my hand. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I signed my name with a sharp, aggressive flourish. The grandfather clock in the corner began to chime. Midnight. "Happy birthday, Miss Hayes," Thomas said quietly. A loud, sudden crash echoed from the foyer, breaking the silence. I set the pen down, bypassing Thomas, and walked out of the study. The scene in the grand entryway was pathetic. 3 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases sat near the front door. Madison was sitting on the bottom step of the sweeping staircase, openly weeping into her hands. Her phone discarded on the marble floor. Amelia was standing near the door, arguing fiercely with 2 private security guards my father must have finally summoned. Her pearl-white cashmere sweater was stained with spilled wine. Her hair was frantic. She looked feral. When she saw me step into the hallway, the argument stopped. She shoved past the guards, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble. She stopped 3 feet from me, her chest heaving. The mask of the loving stepmother was completely gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated venom. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice vibrating with hatred. "You think you can just snap your fingers and throw me out like trash? I gave 5 years of my life to your pathetic, weak father. I built the social standing of this family. You are nothing but a spoiled, mentally unstable brat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You have 20 minutes to get off my property, Amelia. If you are still standing on this marble when the police arrive to investigate the foundation's missing funds, I will ensure you are handcuffed in front of the neighbors." Her eyes widened, the threat landing like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to scream, but the words died in her throat. She looked past me, hoping to see my father, hoping for a last-minute reprieve. The hallway was empty. My father wasn't coming. Amelia let out a jagged, breathless sound. She turned, grabbed Madison by the arm, and hauled her toward the heavy oak doors. "Pick up your bag," Amelia spat at her daughter. I stood in silence and watched the heavy oak doors click shut behind them. The security guards carried the remaining luggage out into the damp night air. I was alone in the foyer. The house was finally mine, but the victory tasted like ash. I knew the truth. Amelia was just the symptom. The rot in Hayes Logistics ran much, much deeper. The morning sun cut through the tall windows of the dining room, illuminating the stain on the Persian rug, where Amelia had spilled her wine. I had been awake all night, drinking black coffee and memorizing the corporate bylaws Thomas had left with me. At exactly 8 o'clock, the front doorbell rang. I didn't wait for the staff. I walked to the door and pulled it open. Oliver stood on the porch. He looked like he had stepped out of a magazine editorial. His dark hair was perfectly tousled, his jawline sharp, his bespoke navy suit tailored to the millimeter. In his right hand, he held a massive bouquet of white peonies, my favorite. In my past life, this man was my anchor. When my mother died, he held me. When I inherited the pressure of the company, he promised to carry the burden. And when I was locked in a psychiatric ward, crying and begging him to believe me, he had simply smiled, kissed my forehead, and signed the paperwork to liquidate my private assets. "Happy birthday, beautiful," Oliver said. His smile was warm, crinkling the corners of his eyes. It was a flawless performance. A wave of physical nausea hit me so hard I had to grip the brass handle of the door. The smell of his Tom Ford cologne filled my lungs, dragging me backward in time to the sterile hospital room, to the way he smelled when he leaned over my deathbed to whisper that it was for the best. I forced my hand to relax. I needed him inside. I needed to see his face when I ripped his world apart. "Oliver," I said, stepping back to let him in. "You're back early. You said the Tokyo conference wouldn't end until Friday. I took the red-eye," he said smoothly. Stepping into the foyer, he pulled me into a hug. I held my breath, letting my arms hang limply at my sides, refusing to touch him. If he noticed my stiffness, he ignored it. He pulled back and handed me the flowers. "I couldn't miss your 25th. It's a big day." "It is," I agreed, taking the flowers. I walked past him, heading toward the study. "Come in. We have a lot to talk about." He followed me, his leather shoes quiet on the hardwood floors. "Your dad's car isn't in the driveway. Is everything okay? You sounded a bit distant on the phone last night." I placed the peonies on the desk. I didn't put them in water. I let them sit on the dry wood. I turned to face him, leaning my hips against the edge of the mahogany desk. "Dad left early," I said, my voice completely devoid of inflection. "He's staying at the city apartment for a few days. Amelia and Madison are gone." Oliver stopped halfway across the room. The warm, concerned fiancé act faltered for a fraction of a second. His brow furrowed, a flicker of genuine alarm crossing his perfectly symmetrical face. "Gone?" he repeated carefully. "What do you mean, gone? Did you guys have a fight?" "You could call it that." I tilted my head, watching him like a scientist observing a lab rat. She tried to ambush me at dinner. She had a manila envelope full of forged medical records. She was going to have me committed and take control of the company. Oliver stared at me. He was good. He was incredibly good. He manufactured a look of absolute, horrified shock within 2 seconds. He closed the distance between us, reaching out to grab my hands. "Harper, my God," he breathed, his voice thick with fabricated outrage. "Are you serious? That's insane. I always knew she was difficult. But a medical proxy? Are you okay? We need to call the police." I looked down at his hands holding mine. His palms were slightly sweaty. "I handled it," I said. I slowly pulled my hands out of his grip. She left her Prada bag on the table. I dumped it out before she could control the narrative. Dad saw the fake pill bottles. He saw the forged proxy. Oliver swallowed hard. The muscle in his jaw jumped. He was calculating the damage, trying to figure out how much I knew, trying to see if his own neck was in the noose. Wow. That's incredibly brave of you, Harper," he said, shifting his weight. "But you must be exhausted. You shouldn't be dealing with corporate matters today. You just went through a massive trauma. Let me handle the board meeting this morning. I can step in, explain the situation. Why did you text Amelia at 4 in the morning? from a Tokyo area code. I interrupted. The silence that followed was suffocating. Oliver froze. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and gray. "What?" I asked, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut like glass. "Why you were texting my stepmother at 4 a.m. Specifically, why you asked her if the package was secured and if Richard signed the proxy." He took a step back. "Harper, you're not making sense. I didn't text Amelia. You're stressed. You're not sleeping." He was trying to gaslight me. Even now, cornered, his first instinct was to question my sanity. I reached behind me and picked up a single sheet of paper from the desk. Thomas had pulled the carrier records overnight. It cost a small fortune and broke several privacy laws. But I didn't care. I dropped the printed transcript on the edge of the desk, right next to the dying peonies. "Don't insult my intelligence, Oliver," I said flatly. "I have the carrier logs. I know about the side deals your consulting firm has been routing through Hayes Logistics. I know you and Amelia plan to split the liquidation of the European shipping routes once I was locked in a padded room." He looked at the paper. He didn't try to pick it up. He knew it was over. The handsome, charming facade melted away, revealing the cowardly, calculating opportunist beneath. His eyes hardened. The panic was replaced by a cold, arrogant sneer. "You think you're so smart," Oliver sneered, adjusting his cuffs. "You think kicking Amelia out solves your problem? You don't know the first thing about running a logistics empire, Harper. You're a little girl playing dress-up in her grandfather's office. The board will eat you alive. They already agreed to the European sale." "Did they?" I asked. I reached to my left hand. I gripped the massive 3-carat diamond engagement ring he had given me 6 months ago. I pulled it off my finger. It slid off easily. I tossed it onto the desk. It hit the wood with a sharp, hollow clink, rolling to a stop against the printed text messages. "Your consulting contract with Hayes Logistics is terminated, effective immediately," I said, stepping away from the desk and walking toward the door. "I'm freezing the European accounts. If you attempt to contact me, my father, or any member of the board, I will hand these transcripts and the offshore banking records to the SEC." I opened the study door and gestured to the hallway. "Get out of my house, Oliver, and take your cheap flowers with you." He glared at me, his fists clenched at his sides. For a second, I thought he might hit me, but Oliver was a coward to his core. He wouldn't risk an assault charge. He snatched the ring off the desk, shoved it into his pocket, and stormed out of the room, slamming the front door behind him. I stood in the quiet house, 2 down. I checked my watch. 8:30. The board meeting was at 10. I walked upstairs to my bedroom. I bypassed the row of soft pastel dresses I usually wore, the clothes of a quiet, agreeable girl. I reached into the back of the closet and pulled out a razor-sharp, charcoal black tailored suit. It was time to go to work. The corporate headquarters of Hayes Logistics was a towering monolith of glass and steel in the financial district. For my entire life, I had walked through these revolving doors, feeling like an imposter. I was the heiress, the mascot, the quiet girl, who trailed behind her powerful grandfather. Today, the air shifted the moment I stepped out of the private elevator onto the executive floor. I didn't smile at the receptionist. I didn't stop for small talk. I walked straight down the long, carpeted hallway toward the central boardroom. The heavy glass doors were closed. I could hear the low hum of masculine voices from inside. Thomas was waiting for me outside the doors, holding a thick leather binder. He looked me up and down, taking in the black suit, the sharp line of my jaw, the absolute lack of hesitation in my stride. He nodded once. They're waiting. Arthur Pendleton is leading the room. Of course he is, I murmured. Arthur Pendleton was the chief financial officer. He had been my grandfather's bitterest rival, a man who believed the company should have gone public a decade ago. In my past life, Arthur was the one who fast-tracked the sale of the European routes the moment I was committed. He was Amelia's inside man. I pushed the glass doors open. The conversation died instantly. 12 men and 2 women sat around the massive oval mahogany table. Arthur Pendleton sat at the head of the table, my grandfather's chair. Arthur paused, a cup of coffee halfway to his mouth. He was a thick-built man with thinning silver hair and a perpetual look of smug superiority. When he saw me, a patronizing smile stretched across his face. "Harper," Arthur said smoothly, setting his coffee down. "Happy birthday. We weren't expecting you today, especially given the family emergency we heard about this morning." He was testing the waters. He knew Amelia had been thrown out. He was trying to see if I was broken, crying, or confused. I didn't answer him. I walked the length of the room. The silence was thick, heavy with unasked questions. I stopped directly behind Arthur's chair. "You're in my seat, Arthur," I said quietly. A ripple of nervous energy moved through the room. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances. Arthur let out a dry, dismissive chuckle. "Now, Harper, let's not be theatrical," Arthur said, leaning back in the chair. He didn't move to get up. "We all know today is technically your transition day, but given your stepmother's sudden departure and the emotional strain you're under, the board has convened an emergency session. We are prepared to vote on a temporary executive committee to handle the daily operations until you're feeling stable." Stable. I tasted the word. I looked down at him, my eyes devoid of warmth. "I am entirely stable, Arthur, which is bad news for you." I slammed my hand down on the back of his chair, leaning in close. "Get out of the chair. Now." Arthur's smug smile faltered. He looked around the table for support, but the pure, aggressive authority in my voice had paralyzed the room. No one met his eye. Face flushing with anger, he abruptly stood up, nearly knocking his coffee over, and moved to an empty seat halfway down the table. I took the head chair. I didn't sit immediately. I stood, resting my fingertips on the polished wood, letting my gaze drift over every single face in the room. As of midnight last night, I began, my voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. I am the sole controlling shareholder of Hayes Logistics. The 51% stake has been executed and filed. This is not a transition period. This is an absolute transfer of power. You don't have the experience to run this company. Arthur snapped, his temper flaring. This is a multi-billion-dollar logistics firm, not a charity project. If you try to veto the European asset liquidation today, the shareholders will file a grievance for gross negligence. I looked at him. I let him stew in his anger for 3 agonizing seconds before I turned to Thomas. Thomas opened the leather binder. He slid a single, stapled document down the length of the table. It came to a stop directly in front of Arthur. "I won't be vetoing the European liquidation, Arthur," I said, sitting down in my grandfather's chair. I crossed my legs, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "Because you won't be proposing it. In fact, you won't be speaking at all." Arthur looked at the document. His face went entirely slack. "That," I continued, projecting my voice so the entire board could hear, "is a copy of a wire transfer log from a shell corporation called Vanguard Shipping. Specifically, it details 3 discrete payments of $400,000 each, deposited into a private account, registered to your wife, Arthur. Payments made by the very European holding company you are pushing us to sell our roots to. The boardroom erupted. Several members gasped. The woman to Arthur's right, literally, pushed her chair away from him. "This is a fabrication," Arthur roared, standing up, his face purple. "This is slander. I have given 20 years to this company. You've been skimming off the top for 5. I shot back, my voice cutting through his shouting like a surgical blade. "You colluded with my stepmother to force a fire sale of our most profitable division so you could collect a massive kickback. The documents are authenticated. The forensic auditors are currently going through your office hard drives." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "You are fired, Arthur. For cause. Security is waiting outside the glass doors. You can leave quietly, or you can leave in handcuffs. The choice is yours." Arthur stared at me. He looked wildly around the room, but the board members had already turned their backs. He was toxic. He was caught. His breathing was ragged. He looked at the documents, then at me. The realization that the quiet, passive girl he had planned to swindle had just slit his corporate throat was written all over his face. Without another word, he turned and marched out of the boardroom, the glass doors swinging heavily behind him. I sat back in my chair. The room was dead silent. 13 pairs of eyes were locked on me, wide with shock, fear, and newfound respect. "Now," I said smoothly, opening my own file, "if there are no further interruptions, let's discuss the third quarter projections." I didn't go back to the house for 3 days. I practically lived in the executive suite, ordering takeout, drinking burnt espresso, and systematically tearing out the infected roots of Hayes Logistics. I fired 6 more executives. I restructured the board. I had Thomas lock down every financial loophole Arthur had left wide open. By Thursday evening, the adrenaline that had kept me standing finally burned out. I felt the exhaustion deep in my bones, a heavy, dragging weight that reminded me I was still human. I needed to sleep in a real bed when my driver dropped me off at the estate. The house was dark. The grand chandelier in the foyer was turned off. It felt less like a home and more like a museum holding the artifacts of a dead family. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, tossing my keys onto the silver tray. "Harper," I stopped. The voice came from the living room. I walked slowly toward the arched doorway. The room was illuminated only by the pale moonlight cutting through the bay windows. My father was sitting in the corner armchair. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 72 hours. He wore the same slacks and dress shirt he had worn on Tuesday, horribly wrinkled. He hadn't shaved. A half-empty glass of scotch sat on the side table next to him. I reached out and flicked the wall switch. The brass lamps flared to life, banishing the shadows. My father winced, raising a hand to shield his eyes. "You shouldn't be sitting in the dark, Dad," I said. My voice was flat. I walked over to the opposite sofa and sat down, keeping the heavy oak coffee table between us. He lowered his hand. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark, bruised circles. He looked at me with a mixture of desperate hope and profound shame. It was the look of a man who had realized he had traded his actual daughter for a parasitic illusion, and the illusion had just evaporated. I kicked them out of the city apartment, he rasped. His voice was cracked, raw from disuse or crying. I didn't care to guess which. Amelia and Madison, I froze the joint accounts. I called the lawyers. We're filing for divorce. He waited. He wanted me to nod. He wanted me to tell him he did a good job, that the nightmare was over, that we could go back to being a family. I didn't say a word. I just watched him. The silence stretched, pulling tight until it snapped. My father leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. A dry, awful sob racked his shoulders. I didn't know, he choked out, his voice muffled by his palms. Harper, I swear to God, I didn't know she was stealing. I didn't know she faked those medical papers. I thought she loved us. I thought you were actually sick. I know you didn't know, I said. He looked up, wiping a hand across his wet face. You believe me. I believe you were completely ignorant, I clarified softly. But ignorance isn't a defense, Dad. It's a choice. He flinched, as if I had hit him. Harper, that's not fair. She manipulated me. She lied to me every day for 5 years. She didn't have to work very hard at it, I countered. The anger I had kept buried under layers of ice finally began to crack the surface. I didn't yell. The quietness of my voice made it worse. You let her manage the foundation because you didn't want to deal with the accountants. You let her take over my schedule because you didn't want to deal with my grief after Grandpa died. You stepped back. You checked out. You left a vacuum, and you were perfectly happy to let her fill it as long as your life stayed comfortable. I was grieving too, he protested, his voice rising in a desperate plea for absolution. And your grief almost killed me, I fired back. I stood up. The sudden movement made him shrink back into the armchair. Do you want to know what would have happened if I hadn't dumped her purse on the table, Dad? Do you want to know how that night ends? My chest was heaving. I could smell the ammonia of the hospice room. I could feel the cold plastic of the mattress. You would have signed that proxy. You would have looked at those fake pills and chosen the easy path. You would have let her lock me in a psychiatric ward for 6 months. You would have let her pump me full of sedatives while she and Oliver liquidated my inheritance. No, he whispered, shaking his head frantically. No, I would never. You did. I slammed my hand on the coffee table. The Scotch glass rattled. In my head, in the reality where I didn't fight back, you let it happen because confronting her was too hard, because believing your daughter was easier than admitting your wife was a monster. My father stared at me, his mouth open, paralyzed by the absolute, visceral conviction in my voice. He didn't know about my past life. He just thought I was describing a hypothetical worst-case scenario. He didn't know he was arguing with a ghost. He slowly lowered his head. The fight completely left his body. What do you want me to do, Harper? Tell me. I'll do anything. I looked down at the broken man in the chair. In my first life, I had worshipped him. Now, I just pitied him. I want you to resign from the foundation, I said. The emotion drained out of me, leaving only the cold arithmetic of corporate survival. I want you to publicly step down from your honorary seat on the board. You can keep your shares, and you will receive your dividends. You will live a very comfortable, very quiet life, but you are done making decisions for this family. He looked up at me. His eyes were completely hollow. He nodded once, a slow, mechanical motion. Okay, if that's what you want, it's what needs to be done. I turned and walked toward the stairs. Call Thomas in the morning. He has the paperwork. Good night, Dad. I didn't look back. I climbed the stairs to my room, locked the door, and fell onto the bed. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up, feeling the phantom ache of my failing organs finally begin to fade. Rats do not go quietly when cornered. They bite. A week later, Amelia bit back. I was in the middle of reviewing a massive freight contract for our Asian shipping lanes when my office door flew open. Chloe, my newly appointed head of public relations, strode in. She was a shark in a tailored skirt suit, and right now, she looked murderous. "Turn on Channel 8, Chloe demanded, pointing a manicured finger at the flat screen mounted on my office wall. I grabbed the remote and clicked it on. It was a mid-morning talk show, the kind that fed off sensationalized scandals and fake tears. Sitting on a beige sofa opposite the host was Amelia. She looked entirely different. The immaculate, wealthy matriarch was gone. She wore a simple, unbranded gray blouse. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. She wore minimal makeup, intentionally highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. She was clutching a tissue, dabbing delicately at the corner of her eye. "It's just been a waking nightmare," Amelia was saying, her voice trembling with perfect, practiced vulnerability. "My husband and I tried so hard to help her. We really did. But the pressure of the inheritance, it broke her mind." The host, a woman with heavily Botoxed empathy, leaned forward. "You're saying Harper Hayes forcibly removed you from your home while suffering from a mental break?" "It was violent," Amelia whispered, staring directly into the camera. "She threatened us. She threatened the board members. She fired a respected executive because of a paranoid delusion. I don't care about the money. I just want my stepdaughter to get the psychiatric help she so desperately needs before she destroys her grandfather's legacy." Chloe crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "She's been shopping this story to every tabloid since Tuesday. Most of them passed because of our legal threats, but this network took the bait. The stock price took a half-point dip in the last 20 minutes. The shareholders are getting nervous." I watched Amelia sniffle on the high-definition screen. It was a brilliant, desperate move. She knew I had the embezzlement records. She was trying to poison the well. If she painted me as a paranoid, violent psychotic to the public, then any evidence I brought forward against her would look like the fabricated revenge plot of a crazy person. "She's trying to force a public competency hearing," I noted, turning the volume down. "Exactly," Chloe said. "She wants to drag you into a courtroom, demand a psychological evaluation, and tie the company up in litigation for years. We need to issue a statement. We need to deny this entirely. I can draft a cease and desist." "No." I dropped the remote onto my desk. I stood up and smoothed the front of my jacket. "Statements are for politicians. We don't defend ourselves against thieves." Chloe frowned. "Harper, you can't just ignore this. The narrative is spinning." "I have no intention of ignoring it," I said. I picked up my phone and dialed Thomas. He answered on the first ring. "Are you watching this garbage?" Thomas barked over the line. "I am," I replied. "Is the package ready?" "Sealed and signed. I have the wire transfers, the IP logs from the Cayman Shell Company, and the sworn affidavit from the forensic auditor." "Good." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the crawling traffic of the city. "Call the district attorney. Hand it over. Make sure the financial crimes unit knows she is actively trying to flee the public eye. Tell them she's a flight risk." "With pleasure," Thomas growled. "What about Oliver?" "Burn him too," I said coldly. "Include the carrier logs showing his coordination with her. Let him try to explain to a grand jury why a consultant was discussing a medical proxy at 4 in the morning. End them both. I hung up the phone. Chloe was staring at me, her eyes wide. You're not issuing a press release, she realized. You're dropping a criminal indictment. A press release is a debate, Chloe. I don't debate. I turned back to my desk. Draft a memo to the board. Tell them the former manager of the Hayes Foundation is under federal investigation for wire fraud, and that the company is fully cooperating with the authorities. That should correct the stock price. It took exactly 4 hours. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the mid-morning talk show narrative was abruptly hijacked by breaking news alerts. I sat at my desk, eating a cold salad, watching the live helicopter footage on the screen. Federal agents were walking up the driveway of a boutique hotel downtown. 10 minutes later, they walked out. Amelia was in handcuffs. The gray blouse didn't look humble anymore. It just looked cheap. She was trying to hide her face behind her hair, screaming at the paparazzi who had flocked to the curb. There was no poise. There was no elegant stepmother. There was just a criminal being shoved into the back of an unmarked black SUV. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You crazy bitch. You ruined my life. It was Oliver. The DA must have frozen his firm's accounts. I deleted the message and blocked the number. I felt nothing. No triumph, no joy, no residual anger. Just a profound, quiet emptiness. The board was clean. The parasites were gone. The game was over. I was alive. 2 months later. The air was crisp. The kind of late November chill that bites at your cheeks and makes the city skyline look crystal clear. I stood on the balcony of the penthouse suite. My penthouse now. I had sold the family estate. I couldn't walk down those mahogany hallways without waiting for an ambush. I needed sterile, high-rise, glass, and concrete. I took a sip of my coffee. It was black, bitter, and hot. Perfect. Hayes Logistics was thriving. The stock was up 12%. I had renegotiated the European routes myself, cutting out the middlemen Arthur had used to line his pockets. I was working 14-hour days. I was ruthless, efficient, and deeply, entirely alone. Rebirth is a funny concept. The novels and movies always make it look like a victory lap. They focus on the revenge, the satisfying click of the trap snapping shut on your enemies. They don't tell you about the quiet moments afterward. They don't tell you about the night terrors. At least twice a week, I still woke up gasping, my hands clawing at my chest, convinced that my lungs were failing. I would run to the bathroom and stare at my reflection, checking my eyes for the jaundice that had marked my slow poisoning. I had a private doctor run my blood work every 2 weeks. I was perfectly healthy. The trauma didn't care. I survived. I had outsmarted them all. But survival comes with a toll. I was 25, but I felt like a 60-year-old war veteran trapped in a young woman's body. I couldn't look at a glass of water without wondering what was in it. I couldn't accept a compliment from a colleague without analyzing their ulterior motives. Oliver's betrayal had killed the romantic in me. Amelia's plotting had killed my trust in family. My father's cowardice had killed my capacity to rely on anyone else. I had built a fortress around myself, constructed of legal documents, NDAs, and corporate power. No one could hurt me anymore, but no one could reach me either. The sliding glass door opened behind me. Harper? I didn't flinch. I turned around. Thomas was standing in the doorway, holding a manila folder. He looked exactly the same as he always did. Unflappable, grim, reliable, the only person left in my life who hadn't tried to use me. "The preliminary hearings are scheduled," Thomas said, stepping out onto the balcony. He handed me the folder. "Amelia's lawyers are trying to plead down. They want a reduced sentence in exchange for returning the foundation's funds. Oliver is turning state's evidence against her to save his own skin." I let out a dry, cynical laugh. Of course he is. Rats will always eat each other when the ship goes down. "Do you want me to accept the plea deal?" Thomas asked. I looked out over the city. Millions of people living their lives, completely unaware of the invisible wars fought in boardrooms and dining rooms. "No," I said quietly. I closed the folder and handed it back to him. "No deals. Let it go to trial. Let the world see exactly who she is. I want every single day she stole from me repaid in a federal cell." Thomas nodded. He didn't question it. He took the folder, tucked it under his arm, and looked at me. His hard, granite expression softened, just a fraction. "You've done well, Harper," he said. It was the highest praise the man was capable of giving. "Your grandfather would be terrified of you, but he'd be incredibly proud." A tight knot in my chest, one I didn't even know was there, loosened slightly. I looked down at my coffee. "Thank you, Thomas. Don't work too late," he muttered, turning back toward the penthouse. "You already own the world. Take a weekend off." He closed the glass door, leaving me alone on the balcony. I looked up at the sky. It was turning a deep, bruised purple as the sun set. I thought about the girl who had died in that freezing hospice bed. She was naive. She was weak. She had loved too freely and trusted too blindly. I mourned her. I really did. But I couldn't be her anymore. I raised my coffee cup to the empty sky, a silent toast to the ghost I left behind. "Rest in peace," I whispered to the cold wind. I turned my back on the setting sun, walked inside, and locked the door. I had a company to run, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me ever again. Revenge doesn't wash away the trauma, but it definitely builds a better fortress. Harper survived, but the scars of her past life will always be the armor she wears in this one. Do you think Harper was too harsh on her father, or did he deserve to be cut out completely? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this dark, grounded take on rebirth and betrayal, hit that like button, share this story with a friend, and subscribe for more deep dive narratives. See you in the next one.